To enjoy this episode ad-free, please visit patreon.com/forensictales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
In April 1996, a motorist traveling along a rural road in Bastrop County, Texas, made a disturbing discovery. Lying in a grassy ditch along the roadside was the body of a young woman. Her clothing was partially removed, and a belt had been tightened around her neck. She would soon be identified as 19-year-old Stacey Stites. Just hours earlier, Stacey had been reported missing after she failed to show up for her early morning shift at the local grocery store. Evidence collected at the scene pointed to a man named Rodney Reed. But nearly 3 decades later, the question still remains. Did investigators convict the right man? This is Forensic Tales, episode 332, The Murder of Stacey Stites. Welcome to Forensic Tales. I'm your host, Courtney Fretwell. Forensic Tales is a weekly true crime podcast with a forensic twist. Each episode features real stories highlighting how forensic science was used to uncover the truth. If you enjoy deep dives into real cases and the science behind them, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. And if you want even more content, including monthly full-length bonus episodes, and early ad-free access to over 300 episodes, you can join our community over on Patreon. The support there truly helps keep the show going. To learn more, visit patreon.com/forensictales. And one small favor that makes a huge difference for the show. If you're enjoying Forensic Tales, please consider leaving a positive review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps other listeners discover the podcast. In April 1996, 19-year-old Stacey Stites from Giddings, Texas, was living out her fairy tale life. Just 11 months earlier, in May 1995, she met and started dating a guy named Jimmy Fennell. He was handsome, he was tall, he was charming, and he was a police officer with the Giddings Police Department. For someone like Stacey, he checked off all the boxes for her future husband. The two had met at the Smithville Jamboree, which is an annual hometown festival in this part of Texas. And according to Stacey's mom, Carol, they were inseparable after that night. By December of 1995, Stacey and Jimmy were engaged. Then not long after that, Stacey, her mom, Carol, and Jimmy all moved into the same apartment complex in Giddings, the Rolling Oats Apartments. Stacey and Jimmy lived together in one unit on the second floor, and Carol lived in another just one floor down. With the wedding planned for May 11th, 1996, Stacey had recently transferred to the produce department at the local H-E-B's grocery store. The new position meant she made a little more money, but it also meant very early mornings. Her typical shift there started at 3:30 in the morning. She needed to be there super early in the mornings to make sure the produce was fully stocked for the day. So to get to work on time each morning, Stacey would typically wake up sometime between 2:45 and 2:50 a.m., taking anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes to get ready. Stacey's work uniform was simple: blue pants, a white undershirt, and her red H-E-B shirt. But when she left for work in the early mornings, she usually just wore the pants and undershirt. She'd carry her red work shirt with her, along with a cup filled with water or juice. Stacey didn't have her own car, so she would either borrow her mom's or sometimes her fiancé's Chevy truck. And the drive from her apartment to work usually took about 25 to 30 minutes, with several stop signs and lights all along the way. She also had to cross over a railroad track. This meant there were plenty of times where her car would have come to a stop on her commute to work. That's a detail to keep in mind for a little later. After work, Stacey would typically go to her mom's apartment downstairs, where they would do wedding prep stuff, or she'd simply take a nap there while Jimmy was at work. Stacey's life was totally normal and happy. And with the wedding just a few weeks away, she had plenty to look forward to. But in just a matter of days, everything would change. After work on April 22nd, 1996, Stacey went to her mom's apartment where she ate lunch and took a short nap. A few hours later, Jimmy got off work from the police station and met them at Carol's apartment. That day, he had borrowed his future mother-in-law's car, so he went there to drop off the extra set of keys. The three of them sat around and chatted a bit about plans for the following day. Jimmy had the next day off work, but Stacey had to be at the grocery store by her regular 3:30 in the morning shift. Then after work, the two of them planned to stop by the insurance company to add Stacey to his car insurance and the florist to decide on wedding arrangements. The original plan was for Jimmy to drive Stacey to work early that next morning. Although Carol suggested Stacey drive herself so he could sleep in since he had the day off, Jimmy said he would rather take her himself. He didn't mind getting up early and could always come back and go back to sleep if he needed to. He didn't have to be at work that day, so he had time. That evening, Jimmy left his truck at the apartment to go coach a little league baseball game with his friend and fellow police officer, David Hall, and returned home sometime between 8 o'clock and 8:30. He met Stacey outside her mom's apartment, and together they went upstairs to their own place. Carol would later say that her daughter seemed really happy that night. They walked upstairs hand in hand. They were just two people who were in love and excited to get married. According to Jimmy, when they got home, they showered together but weren't intimate. That's another detail you'll want to remember for later. The reason they hadn't been intimate, according to Jimmy, was because Stacey was taking birth control pills and was in the placebo week of her pack, the inactive pills taken during her period, so they didn't want to risk it. After the shower, Jimmy said they talked about their plan again for the following day, but this time they changed it slightly. Instead of Jimmy driving Stacey to work, she was going to borrow his truck and drive herself. So by 9 o'clock that night, Stacey was in bed, while Jimmy stayed up to watch the news for a little while. That was the last time he said he saw her alive. The next morning, April 23rd, Stacey's coworker, Andrew, arrived at the grocery store parking lot at around 3:30 and waited for Stacey to get there. He would usually wait in his car for Stacey to arrive so that they could keep an eye on each other to make sure nobody was around and walk inside the store together. Stacey had always been the type of employee to arrive right on time. So when she wasn't there by 3:30, the start of her shift, Andrew grew worried about her. He eventually decided to get out of his car and go inside the store, but he kept his eye out for Stacey, thinking she might just be running a little late. Maybe she got stuck by a crossing train and it was taking longer than usual. He had no idea that his friend and coworker was likely dead. About 2 hours later, at 5:30, Bastrop Police Department officer Paul Alexander spotted a red pickup truck parked in the Bastrop High School parking lot. Knowing that the truck wasn't parked there during his previous patrol of the area and that there were no other vehicles in the lot, Officer Alexander contacted the dispatcher for a stolen vehicle check. And that's when the dispatcher reported back that the truck belonged to Jimmy Fennell, Stacey's fiancé, who was also a police officer. When Officer Alexander looked inside the cab with his flashlight, he noticed the driver's seat reclined and books and clothing on the seats. He also noticed that on the ground right next to the driver's side door, there was a small piece of a broken belt with a buckle. But it wasn't anything to raise alarm bells about. He was used to finding loose stuff like wallets, shoes, or books left by students in the school parking lot, so he just didn't think much of the belt at the time. Officer Alexander had no idea that he was standing in the middle of a crime scene. Still waiting for Stacey to arrive at work, Andrew finally decided to call Carol between 6:30 and 7 that morning to let her know she hadn't shown up for her shift, which was completely unlike her. Carol then picked up the phone and immediately called Jimmy, who told her to hang up and call the police while he went out himself to look for her. Carol had both sets of keys to her car, so Jimmy took Stacey's set and left in Carol's car to look for Stacey. He drove from the Rolling Oaks apartments to the grocery store and back, but there wasn't any sign of Stacey or the truck. Meanwhile, the authorities had also started looking for her. At about 9 o'clock, after authorities received the missing persons report, BPD investigator Ed Salmala was dispatched to the high school parking lot, and when he got there, he started photographing everything. He also had Jimmy come take a look at it to see if anything looked suspicious. And right away, Jimmy knew something was really, really wrong. The first was that one of Stacey's tennis shoes she wore to work was on the passenger side floorboard of the truck. There was a foamy substance resembling saliva on the carpet, covering the hump over the truck's transmission. There were broken pieces of green plastic in the console from the type of cup that Stacey usually took with her in the truck. The driver's seat was reclined at a 45-degree angle. The driver's seatbelt was buckled, and there was a smudge on the passenger side back window. Then there were the items Jimmy recognized on the outside of the truck. He saw carbon copies of the checks from his checkbook and the piece of the belt with a buckle attached, which Jimmy told investigators was part of the belt that Stacey normally wore to work. The truck was eventually taken to the crime lab in Austin for a search, but while they were going through it, the police got a call about the discovery of a female body. At about 2:45 that afternoon, a motorist came across the body of a young female in the bar ditch running alongside Bluebonnet Drive, a circular dirt road that enters and exits on FM 1441 in Bastrop County. When he approached the body, which was visible from the roadway, he said he knew right away she was dead. So he got back into his car, drove to the nearest house, called the police, and then returned to Bluebonnet Drive to wait for the authorities. The body belonged to 19-year-old Stacey Stites. By 5 o'clock that evening, crime scene investigators were on scene. The first thing they noticed was the position of Stacey's body. It had been propped up by a small mound of dirt that made her body sort of roll to one side, but it wasn't completely rolled. It was twisted, so the upper part of the body was flat. Her legs were folded over, and her arms were above her head. She was only wearing one shoe, but the bottom of her sock was clean, suggesting that she hadn't walked shoeless outside. A grocery store name tag with the name Stacey was tucked in the crook of her leg. Her white undershirt was found thrown over a nearby bush, meaning she was only wearing her bra and blue pants. But the zipper on her pants had been broken. Stacey's underwear was found bunched up around her hips, and when it was tested for the presence of semen, it came back positive, suggesting a sexual assault. There was also saliva found on her breasts. When it came to how she was killed, investigators theorized she had been strangled by her own belt. They found marks on her neck consistent with the pattern of a broken belt that was found near her body. And when the piece of belt found at the high school was brought to the scene, detectives compared the two and concluded that they matched. Beyond strangulation, Stacey had other injuries on her body, including scratches and bruises across her stomach, arms, and chest. But noticeably missing were any defensive wounds. That detail may or may not be important for later. In the area around Stacey's body, 2 Busch beer cans were collected and analyzed for fingerprints, but no usable prints were found on them. Then by 11 o'clock that night, there was an update from the medical examiner's office. When Stacey's vaginal swabs were analyzed under a microscope, the examiner noted that the sperm cells still had their tails, suggesting that the sexual activity was fairly recent. At the time, investigators relied on research indicating that sperm tails can remain attached for up to about 26 hours inside the vaginal tract. And based on that understanding, they believed the sexual contact had happened sometime within that window before Stacey's body was discovered. But this particular interpretation of the forensic evidence would later become a point of debate. For the next 11 months, authorities focused their investigation on people that Stacey knew, and with a $50,000 reward offered by the grocery store she worked at, the leads came pouring in. In total, the police interviewed hundreds of people, including her coworkers, former classmates, and ex-boyfriends. And when all was said and done, 28 male suspects were identified, some immediately and some during the ensuing investigation. Each of them was asked to give blood, hair, and saliva samples. With the exception of one, Brian Haynes, all of the suspects agreed to provide samples. Although Haynes refused to consent, he was compelled to provide samples after authorities obtained a search warrant. They also requested and obtained samples from David Hall, who, because of his friendship with Jimmy, was at one point viewed as a suspect, but testing excluded him as the semen donor. As the last known person to see Stacey alive, Jimmy was considered a suspect from the very start, but he was eventually cleared. His DNA didn't match the semen. Not long after that, another suspect popped up, David Law Hahn. He emerged as a suspect after the police learned that he had murdered an Elgin woman named Mary Ann Arlt a few weeks after Stacey was killed. Some people even told police that Law Hahn and Stacey may have been in a relationship and he bragged about killing her. However, investigators were never able to confirm that the two had any real connection, and eventually, testing ruled Law Hahn out as the source of the semen, and he was eliminated as a suspect. Then there was the police officer who first discovered the abandoned truck at the high school. At one point, he was considered a possible suspect after he committed suicide at his home in August of 1996. But he was also cleared after testing. Finally, there was Rodney Reed. Losing weight is one thing, but keeping it off, that's where it gets really frustrating. That's why Weight Loss by Hers now offers access to the FDA-approved Wegovy pill and the FDA-approved Wegovy pen. Wegovy is designed to help you lose weight and keep it off. Everything is 100% online through Hers. You'll connect with a licensed provider who will determine if treatment is right for you. If prescribed, your medication is delivered right to your door. No insurance necessary. Ready to reach your goals? Visit forhers.com/tales to get a personalized, affordable plan that gets you. That's forhers.com/tales. forhers.com/tales. Weight Loss by Hers is not available in all 50 states. Wegovy is the registered trademark of Novo Nordisk AS. To get started and learn more, including important safety information, Wegovy clinical study information, and restrictions, visit forhers.com. Throughout the course of the investigation, detectives began looking at a man named Rodney Reed, who lived in Bastrop near the railroad tracks. Those tracks were important because Stacey would have crossed them on her way to work that morning. Reed also lived less than a mile from Bastrop High School, where Stacey's truck had been found abandoned. He was seen frequently walking in that area late at night and early in the morning. But at the time, investigators said they had found no evidence that Stacey and Reed knew each other, which is a very important detail in this case. Rodney Reed also looked like a good suspect because he had been involved in a similar attack on another woman 6 months later on November 9th, 1996. A 19-year-old woman named Linda Schluter had stopped at a payphone when she met a man who asked for a ride. She agreed, but when she went to drop him off, the man suddenly attacked her. He threatened to kill her if she didn't perform sexual acts on him. Before anything else could happen, headlights from another car approached, and the man panicked. He fled the scene in the victim's car. Police later detained Rodney Reed based on the description the female victim gave, and she eventually identified him in a photo lineup. Investigators also noticed that her car was later found not far from the high school, the same area where Stacey's truck had been abandoned. When detectives learned that Rodney Reed's DNA was already on file from an investigation into an alleged rape of a woman with intellectual disabilities in May 1995, they sent it for testing in Stacey's case. And preliminary results showed that he couldn't be excluded as the contributor. With that information in hand, detectives obtained a warrant to collect a fresh sample of Reed's DNA. This time, the sample underwent even further testing, which once again showed that he couldn't be excluded. So on April 4th, 1997, Rodney Reed was officially charged with Stacey's murder. It wasn't hard to arrest him because he was already in jail on unrelated charges. So after he was formally charged with 2 counts of capital murder, 1 for murder in the course of aggravated sexual assault, and 1 for murder in the course of kidnapping, he was ordered to remain in custody without bond. Fast forward 1 year to March 1998, the start of Reed's trial. One thing I want to mention before getting too deep into the trial, Rodney Reed is an African-American male, and Stacey Stites is a white female. And when it came time to select a jury, they were described as mostly white, with no African Americans among the 12 jurors or 2 alternates. Whether that played a role in the verdict, I'll leave it to you to form your own opinion. Prior to the start of the trial, Reed denied knowing Stacey or ever having met her. In fact, in a signed statement to the police, he denied knowing her beyond what was reported in the news. However, when it came time for the trial, Reed's story completely changed. Instead of saying he didn't know and had never met her before, he claimed that he and Stacey were involved in a consensual romantic relationship prior to her murder. He also denied killing her. According to Reed, he wasn't honest about his relationship with Stacey because, quote, it wouldn't be in his best interest to be associated with a dead white woman. He said he also knew that she was engaged to a white police officer, and because of where they live in Texas, he was afraid for his life. There was still a lot of racism going on there, so that's why he initially denied knowing her. But now that he's on trial for first-degree murder, his story has completely changed. According to Reed, his relationship with Stacey was completely consensual. However, I think now is a good time to mention that Rodney Reed used a very similar defense in 1987 when he was charged with a different aggravated sexual assault, which led to his acquittal. When it came to why his semen would be found on Stacey's body, he had an explanation for that as well. He claimed that he and Stacey had consensual intercourse before she was killed, but denied being the one who did it. Remember earlier when I mentioned that the state's crime lab experts said sperm tails usually remain attached for up to about 26 hours? Based on that, prosecutors argued that the sexual activity likely happened shortly before Stacey's death. But the defense challenged that idea. Their experts said the presence of sperm with tails doesn't reliably tell you exactly when intercourse occurred. In fact, sperm can remain in the body much longer than that in some cases. So, according to the defense, the DNA evidence proved that Rodney Reed had sex with Stacey, but it didn't prove when that happened. To prove a romantic relationship between himself and Stacey, he called Julia Estes, a Bastrop County resident and Reed family acquaintance, to testify. She stated that sometime in early 1996, she saw Stacey and Reed chatting inside the grocery store where Stacey worked. She testified that she recognized Stacey from having seen her in the store and from having talked with her a few times in the past. But on cross-examination by prosecutors, Estes acknowledged that Reed and Stacey were just talking. It didn't necessarily suggest a secret affair between them. Reed also called Iris Lindley, a longtime friend of his parents, to the witness stand. Lindley testified that in early 1996, she was sitting on the porch at Reed's house, visiting with Reed's mother, when a woman drove up to the house in a gray truck. She said the woman got out of the car and asked if Reed was home, and they replied that he wasn't. After that, the witness said the woman said, "Would you tell Rodney that Stephanie came by?" But then Reed's attorneys corrected her, asking, "Stephanie or Stacey?" And that's when the witness corrected herself, saying it was Stacey. So it's a little suspicious that one of Reed's star witnesses got the names mixed up. But when she was shown a picture of Stacey's driver's license, she said, "That's the woman who came to the house that day." She was just mistaken and nervous while on the witness stand. Another part of Rodney Reed's defense was to say that someone else committed the murder, either Stacey's fiancé, Jimmy, or David Lawhon. Lawhon was the guy who bragged about killing Stacey and was rumored to be having an affair with her. He was also the one who murdered another woman just a few weeks after Stacey was killed. When it came to the fiancé, Reed argued that the police never searched their shared apartment, even when he was considered a promising suspect. He also said that although Jimmy Fennell was a police officer, he was also a controlling and possessive partner and would later serve 10 years in prison for kidnapping and raping a woman in 2007. Obviously, that information wasn't available at Reed's original trial, but they still pointed the finger at him and said he was a controlling boyfriend. Tammy Hanneth, one of Stacey's high school friends, described Jimmy as a little bit more possessive than Stacey's prior boyfriends. Hanneth recounted an incident in which he seemingly made Stacey hang up the phone, or disconnected the line himself, when he overheard her making plans to go out. Hanneth also vaguely suggested that Jimmy had once slashed Stacey's tires. The defense also tried to present the jury with evidence that in October and December 1996, he failed 2 separate polygraph examinations relating to Stacey's murder. But the trial judge sustained the state's objections to that evidence. So the jury never got to hear that. However, prosecutors were quick to point out that both David Lawhon and Jimmy were excluded by DNA. Remember earlier in the episode when I mentioned that Jimmy and Stacey didn't have intercourse the night before her murder? That's an important forensic clue because his semen wasn't found, suggesting he was telling the truth. It was only Reed's. So that was the trial. You had the prosecution saying Rodney Reed was guilty because his DNA couldn't be excluded from the semen found on Stacey's body. He abducted her on her way to work, assaulted her, then murdered her. He lived nearby and was frequently seen prowling out there late at night and in the early morning hours. And there was no credible evidence he was having an affair with her, and the assault was consensual. And you had the defense saying he and Stacey were involved in a secret relationship, and that's why his semen was there. They had intercourse sometime before she was killed, but it was someone else who murdered her. They said the prosecution's theory about how long sperm with tails can be found is outdated. The sperm tells us they had intercourse, but it doesn't prove murder, and it doesn't say exactly when that intercourse occurred. So which side would the jury believe? Well, on May 18th, 1998, after 6 hours of deliberation, the jury found Rodney Reed guilty of capital murder. They just didn't believe the story about this being a consensual affair and someone else was responsible for murdering Stacey on her way to work that morning. Instead, they believe the prosecution's claim that the only way Reed's semen got there was because he assaulted her before killing her. 10 days later, on May 28th, everyone was back in court. This time, it was to decide Reed's punishment. And after 4 hours of deliberation, the same jury that convicted him of murder sentenced him to death. For Stacey's family and loved ones, it was bittersweet. They knew the outcome wouldn't bring her back, but they were relieved to get a conviction. But Reed's family was devastated. They really believed the system convicted yet another innocent man. Whichever side you find yourself on, that's not the end of this story. Since 1998, Reed has filed 9 appeals, all without success. Several of those appeals focused on claims that witness statements and other evidence that might have raised reasonable doubt were never given to the defense. However, prosecutors argued that the information was irrelevant and therefore did not need to be turned over. Regarding the witness statements that weren't provided to Reed's lawyers at trial, there were several of Stacey's coworkers who said they believed she may have been seeing a black man. Some told investigators they had seen her talking with a black man in the store parking lot and thought the two appeared to know each other. But none of this information was turned over to the defense during discovery. That could be important evidence because it suggests Reed might be telling the truth about a potential consensual relationship. Number 2. 2 witnesses have since come forward suggesting the real killer is Stacey's former fiancé, Jimmy Fennell. One is an insurance salesperson who said that Jimmy threatened to kill Stacey while applying for life insurance. And the other witness was a deputy in the Lee County Sheriff's Office at the time of the murder, to whom Jimmy apparently made an incriminating statement about Stacey's body at her funeral. Reed's lawyers also claim that Jimmy Fennell has since confessed to murdering Stacey. They allege he confessed to his former prison cell, saying he had to kill Stacey because he found out she was having an affair with a black man. Remember how I mentioned that Jimmy ended up serving a 10-year prison sentence for a sexual assault that happened while he was on duty as a police officer? Well, that's where that confession apparently came from. The final big part of his appeal involves the alleged murder weapon, the belt. That belt hasn't been tested for DNA. We'll talk a lot more about that in just a minute, but let's talk about his roller coaster journey on death row first. Reed's first execution date was scheduled for January 14th, 2015, but was rescheduled for May 5th. But on February 23rd, his execution was stayed to allow the consideration of further evidence. It was later rescheduled for November 20th, 2019. But as that date got closer and closer, the case started gaining a lot of attention, especially from major celebrities like Kim Kardashian, Rihanna, Beyonce, and Oprah, who all publicly urged the Texas governor to exonerate Reed or stay his execution. And that was just a small list of celebrities who got involved. Dozens more would eventually talk about Reed's case. It also received a lot of media and TV attention when Reed was interviewed on the Dr. Phil show, in which Dr. Phil basically said he shouldn't be executed because he didn't get a fair trial. All of that attention led to action. By November 14th, 2019, a petition to free Reed, started by Shaun King, had reportedly gotten more than 3 million signatures. There was even a group of 16 bipartisan Texas state senators who publicly asked the governor to stay his execution on the grounds that new, possibly exculpatory evidence had come to light. So just days before he was set to die, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles unanimously recommended that the governor grant him a 120-day reprieve. Later that same day, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals halted Reed's execution indefinitely so it could review new claims in the case, including allegations that important evidence had not been disclosed and that some testimony may have been misleading. A few months later, in February 2020, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear Reed's appeal at that time, saying the case was still being reviewed in lower courts. Then, in October 2021, a Bastrop County judge who had been assigned to re-examine the case recommended that Reed shouldn't receive a new trial. In June 2023, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals officially denied Reed's request for a new trial in a 7-1 decision, stating that Reed had not shown that he was more likely than not innocent. Reed then asked the U.S. Supreme Court to review the decision, but in July 2024, the court declined to take the case. At the time all of this was happening, there was another battle happening, the DNA battle. Like I mentioned a moment ago, Reed's attorneys argued that the belt used to strangle Stacey had never been tested for DNA and should be looked at. They really believe that could be a crucial piece of evidence establishing his innocence. So in April of 2022, the Supreme Court agreed to hear about the DNA testing. And exactly a year later, in 2023, they actually ruled in his favor, allowing him to continue pursuing his request for DNA testing. So as of today, that's still his biggest chance at either complete freedom or possibly getting a new trial. If DNA testing can be done on the belt and it points in someone else's direction, Rodney Reed can very well walk out of prison a free man. But what will happen if that testing leads us back to him? Will the state of Texas follow through on its vow to execute him? Because as of the time I'm sitting down to record this, all the forensic evidence in the case links him to the crime. It was his sperm found inside the victim's body, but he argues it's from consensual contact he had with her sometime before the murder. However, prosecutors say that's ridiculous. He used this same defense in another attempted sexual assault case. There's no credible evidence they had a prior relationship, and they argue that the forensic evidence suggests the sexual contact happened right before the murder took place. So you would have to believe that within moments of Reed and Stacey seeing each other, someone else came and killed her that morning on her way to work. But once again, the defense says it's totally plausible. The heart of their case is that the DNA proves sex, not murder. No one knows how this case will eventually unfold. Rodney Reed is still on Texas death row, and we're all waiting to see whether DNA testing will be done on the murder weapon. For some, the DNA evidence that was presented at his original trial leaves little doubt. Rodney Reed abducted Stacey during her commute, raped her, and murdered her. There was no secret relationship. They didn't know each other. He used that defense before to get out of trouble, and it was his semen with the tails still attached that was found freshly deposited at the scene. For others, the DNA evidence raises even more questions. Is Reed telling the truth about a secret affair? Was Stacey afraid her police officer fiancé would find out about it? Are they telling the truth when they say the DNA proves sex but not murder? Is it possible for the sperm tails to be intact for much longer than the prosecution experts argued? And until new DNA testing finally answers those questions, the truth about what happened to Stacey Stites that morning may remain buried somewhere between science, testimony, and doubt. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell. If you'd like to support the show and help fund research, production, and editing, you can do so with a small monthly contribution on Patreon. Patreon supporters get early access to ad-free episodes and exclusive bonus content. Thank you so much to this week's newest supporter, Kevin T. You can learn more at patreon.com/forensic tales. And if you enjoy the show, leaving a positive rating or review really helps others discover it. For a full list of sources used in this episode, visit forensictales.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.